Good afternoon and welcome to the 2021 AHMP National Conference. I'm glad that you are all here. I will be asking the question today, can a CHMM do SQF? This is really a case study about how I used my EHS skill in a tangential way related to safe, quality food. My name is Donna, and I'm here because I'm passionate about our planet's resources. I have also been a participant in the AHMP and its predecessor for many years and find value in my membership. I've been a CHMM since 1993 and have played an active role in the Philadelphia chapter since that time. And I am currently on the AHMP Board of Directors. I have utilized my fellow CHMMs as resources, but also think that I have increased my own personal value by meeting the professional development requirements of the certification. As I said, today I would like to present a case study of how being a CHMM helped me to expand into a tangential business of SQF. I'll talk a bit about my history, how this new opportunity presented itself, what it took to be successful, and ultimately the outcomes. My general theme today is from my favorite movie, and that is Keep Moving Forward. I'm admittedly an old dog, and in order to prevent my path from becoming stagnant, I have made myself take on challenges. However, the challenges I have recently taken have been as a direct result of my professional ability to problem solve. We are all problem solvers, aren't we? And that's what we do every day. So some important dates for me in my journey are listed here. In 1989 is when I started working in the EHS industry for an asbestos removal contractor. It wasn't until 1993 that I became a CHMM. And in 1996, ISO first published the 14001 standard, the environmental management standard. And although that doesn't seem like it should affect me, it really shifted my work process. In 2001, I transferred from manufacturing roles into EHS consulting. In 2018, I became a sole practitioner, started my own business, and eventually became a certified women business enterprise. And I have since helped 2 companies with safe food programs. The most recent was in March of 2021. A little bit more detail about my history. Mostly, I've been focusing on environmental health and safety compliance. As I mentioned earlier, I started out with an asbestos removal contractor. I also worked with a waste management company. Basically, I was in a position where generators would call me and say, I've got this green gookie stuff, what do I do with it? I moved on to working in industrial manufacturing for several different companies. And then I worked for a global consulting firm doing environmental health and safety program support. During these times, the skills I developed were through auditing, regulatory interpretation. When I started in the late 80s, there was no ECFR, and so we would have to buy books every year. And I had lots of highlights and sticky pads keeping places for the important regulations that I referred to frequently. I learned how to do research. I became proficient at training people, and I wrote lots of policies and procedures. And of course, the training was on the policies and procedures that made up the EHS program. Through all of this, I feel like I've really honed my sense of attention to detail. And I feel like every EHS professional should have a very good attention to detail as one of the tools in their professional toolbox. Manufacturers started to utilize management systems such as ISO to drive and manage EHS compliance programs. And as I mentioned earlier, that happened in the late 90s. And as a result of that, I transitioned into developing and implementing ISO-like programs. Now, kind of the way ISO works, or environmental management systems, many people can develop an ISO-like program, quote unquote, ISO-like. Whether or not that gets certified by a third party is really a business decision that the people were making. But it really provided a systematic rigor to environmental health and safety program development. And ISO did not provide new regulations. It just systematically or made companies use a systematic approach to determine what they needed to work on and what they needed to focus on. In 2018, everything changed for me. I became an independent consultant, which was terrifying for sure, but it was also tremendous. And I'm fortunate enough to say that I'm still in a very good position as an independent consultant. And my business model included meeting the needs of industry folks with whom I had had historic relationships. So as part of my marketing strategy, and I'll put that in quotes as well, I was meeting friends, I was meeting CHMMs that I had been in contact with over the years. I was meeting with former colleagues for lunch, happy hours, dinner, whatever, any way that I could collect information and share about my new venture and my views of the future. It was fine with me. However you could meet with me, that was what I wanted to do. And many of my CHMM buddies that I've met over the years gave me support and tips. They were very, very forthcoming with information to help me out. And I really, really appreciated their valuable input on that. One day, a colleague of mine was lamenting about having to implement a certified safe food program for one of his customers, and he didn't really know how to move forward with getting that done. Well, I took a leap of faith and told him that I could support his effort. I mean, I could do that, right? Well, I was practicing the advice of a business person with a lot of chutzpah. My future client threw down the gauntlet and I took the challenge. And Richard Branson, the Virgin Group businessman, on July 12th, he rocketed his spaceship into space. So I have a lot of respect for the way this guy thinks. So now I had to figure out how to get it all done. And by the way, I had to tell my client how much it would cost. And actually, I think that was the hardest part. So I did what any EHS professional would do. I read the regulations. I had to change my focus a bit from hazardous materials risk to food risk. But I have to tell you, it was pretty much the same process. I also had to become a qualified individual, which means, and I'll put that in quote as well, because a qualified individual is an actual thing in the definitions of the SQF standard. In order to become a qualified individual, I had to take a class, and that class had an exam. And after I passed that exam satisfactorily, I was considered qualified. Then I started reading periodicals about food safety related to manufacturing so that I knew what other companies were doing too, so that I could help inform the safe quality food program that I was helping develop for my client. From a business owner's perspective, this time was a bit hard because I was doing much of this work on my own dime. However, in the end, it was a business expense that paid off. So I relied on my attention to detail and methodical approach. I relied on my procedure writing experience, and I relied on my auditor experience to drive the effort. the first thing I had to do was a gap assessment to see how big the actual effort was going to be. Then, using the standard as a guide, I wrote policies and procedures that had never existed before. Although this company had been doing much of the requisite activities, there was no written procedure and no written documentation. Very, very little was being actually documented. And you and I know if it's not documented, it never happened, right? There were also some operational changes that I had to help the company implement. So I helped them implement technology that enabled the QA specialists to meet all the requirements. And really, frankly, spreadsheets were just not cutting it. So for this particular person, I implemented an app-based inspection procedure. The QA specialist was a millennial after all, and he preferred walking around with his phone and clicking yes, no, and taking pictures to upload to the app instead of walking around with a checklist. I help them to obtain and figure out how to use monitoring equipment for things like testing for the presence of bacteria and allergens on their equipment. Next, after the procedures were written and the inspections and things were developed, I had to show everybody how to use everything, how to use the procedures and the policies and the checklist and to do the inspections and what kinds of things to look for and what proper documentation looked like. And I also had to train employees on the vocabulary. So like I said before, they were already doing a lot of the procedures, doing a lot of the testing, doing a lot of the inspections. They just didn't have the language down. I had to tell them what GMP meant and what CCP meant. So it was a whole nother list of acronyms that they were not used to. And I just had to help them change their language for the interviews. I don't know if any of you have been through an ISO audit or a similar management system type of audit, but when an auditor comes through and does interviews with the general population, he's looking for specific keywords and key topics, in some cases based on the questions he's asking. And my goal was to train the employees to use the same language that the auditor was going to be looking for. Then the hardest part was making sure that all the activities were being accomplished, and most importantly, that they were being documented. And some of the documentation, the technicians didn't really understand why it had to be done, and they felt like it was just an added burden on them. But in the end, after talking a lot about it and going through the audit, frankly, showed them the importance of doing these new procedures. I wanted to take a minute here and just talk in a little bit more detail about the SQF code in particular. So here are a list of most of the standards that are associated with the SQF code. Many of them should look really familiar to EHS professionals. They're very similar to what companies have to do when implementing an ISO program. The topics in red here are the ones that I had to get smart about. So for example, GMP and personal hygiene. GMP means good manufacturing practices. And this is where you have to determine where hairnets are required, if you have to wear a smock in certain areas to cover your clothing, whether or not you're allowed to wear jewelry into either the plant or processing location. Product traceability and recalls, that was a new topic familiar to me. I had to figure out how to communicate problems with a product to customers, suppliers, and agencies, and to ultimately the consumer. Because in this case, this company was their customers were grocery stores and convenience stores. So the consumer was not their direct customer. But we had to be able to get information out to the consumer, and I had to figure out how to do that. And it was very similar to coming up with a communications plan for an emergency response plan. So if you have a spill, who do you call? When do you have to call them? What kinds of events trigger you having to call the agencies, that kind of thing. So it's the same mindset, just from a different perspective, and obviously the agencies were different. Food defense and food fraud was another topic that I wasn't that familiar with, and had to do some research and benchmarking on it. And food defense and food fraud are two programs that ensure you are getting what you ordered as far as your raw materials are concerned, and that nothing can happen unexpectedly to your raw materials and finished product. So this process makes you take a critical look at your supply chain and ask questions like, will this vendor give me diluted product or tainted product? And how can I prevent that from happening? Food defense is about securing your facility from rogue employees and unwanted visitors. So the food defense program makes you look at site security and camera placement and visitor logs and things like that. Allergen management is another area that was new for me, and it's really like chemical management. So, or, incompatible chemical management. So operations has to prevent, for example, peanuts from being mixed with other ingredients, unless of course they're supposed to be mixed with those ingredients. So an allergen management plan includes material labeling, like what materials and what final products have peanuts in them. How to store it so that the peanuts can't commingle with other ingredients that go into products that are considered peanut free. And what are the equipment cleaning methods that prevents peanut residue being left on equipment that you're now going to process products that aren't supposed to have peanuts in it. And, this shouldn't be rocket science for EHS professionals. It's about how well you're cleaning your equipment and how well you're storing your materials. It's not dramatically new information. It's just a different chemical, so to speak, that you're having to manage. And then the next, or really the most important new thing for me, was critical control points. Critical control points are points where within the manufacturing process, which if there's a failure can ruin the safety of the product or the food. So for example, if chicken isn't cooked to 165 degrees, if you're making chicken patties, for example, then it may result in foodborne illnesses. Or if a metal detector fails, and then it may result in a metal object being shipped within a product, resulting in a potential choking hazard. So let me give you an example of the tool that I use to identify what the critical control points are. So this might be a little bit hard to see, especially if you're on a cell phone or a tablet, but this is a pretty standard risk matrix where you're breaking down each process step, looking at potential hazards, rating them based on the likelihood and severity that this problem would occur or the risk would occur, and then identifying the controls that are in place, including administrative controls that can prevent it from happening. And then if there is a failure, what are the required corrective actions? So you can see that in this example, I show here that the metal detector is listed as a critical control point, in that if the metal detector were to fail, there's a probability that metal would end up in the finished product. And your critical limit would be 0 metal in any of your products. So there is a pretty high likelihood that this might occur, and the severity of having a failure at this point would be pretty high. This tool also identified allergens as a significant risk. You see that there, it's rated at a 6 and it's highlighted in red. And this is based on the likelihood that cross-contamination will occur and the severity of the problem both being relatively high. But you'll also notice that pathogens in this step is not listed as severe, or I'm sorry, as a significant risk, because it has a relatively low risk. You'll see there that the likelihood is 1, because this particular example, they don't process food that spoils. So the likelihood of bringing this kind of pathogen into the process is really, really low. So what were the outcomes? Well, my beer drinking client passed the third-party audit with a 99% score on their very first try. I was so excited, I did a little dance like this woman here is doing. The auditor actually called me after the fact and asked me how I had been so successful and wanted to know if he could pass my name along to other companies looking for food safety program support. To me, that is the highest compliment that you can pay, you know, pass my name on forward to everyone that you know. And all I could tell him was that I have, you know, even though I was new to the safe food arena, the process was very similar to what I have been doing throughout my whole EHS career. I've since been able to support a second company with developing and implementing a third-party certified food safety program, and they scored in the 90% range too. And just as a reference, 70% is considered a passing grade. So anything above 70 is fine. What I'm most proud of, though, is that the second company that I worked with was able to double his business as a direct result of having obtained the certification. And to me, that was an amazing feeling to know that, you know, even though I sent the guy, you know, a bill at the end of all of my effort, and even though it did take 6 months to get the program together, to me, in the end, it made me feel so good that this man was able to double his business. So in closing, I would like to share with you my favorite mantra, and that's keep moving forward. Always look for opportunities where you can improve your position, whether it's within the EHS realm or in some tangential industry or arena. The skills that you use every day to solve EHS situations can be used in other ways to be successful. And I'm hoping that this case study showed you a pretty clear example of that. And personally, expanding into this business has provided a growth opportunity for this old dog, and yet it has allowed me to continue with my underlying personal goal to improve and protect human health and the environment, and to support organizations in providing value to consumers. With that, I would like to say thank you. Thank you for your participation today. Please let me know if you have any questions, whether it's about SQF, whether it's about documenting or making an ISO-like program, or if you have any questions on being a member of the AHMP and the value that is created for me within my business and, you know, in my personal development. My contact information is there, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.